Welcome to the Real Appreciation Podcast. I'm David Clair-Bennett, and I'm honored to be here with today's guest. He is a writer for Family Guy. He's helped write special material for the Oscars, and he's also a producer for the hit Peacock series Ted. Please welcome to the show, Patrick Meighan.
Thanks for having me.
I was telling you off camera that I'm such a huge fan of what you do and for Family Guy and everything like that. And it seems like a lot of my vocabulary actually is various quotes from Family Guy episodes that you probably have wrote in the first place.
Okay.
And speaking of Family Guy, let's go ahead and talk about it. So, you have written over 50 episodes of Family Guy. I'm curious to know what that creative process is like for a show like this.
Yeah. What's the creative process like? Somebody on the writing staff oftentimes will say, hey, I have an idea for an episode, and we'll just sort of like pitch that notion to the showrunners, who are Rich Appel and Alex Sulkin, and if they like it, they'll be like, yeah, that's great. Let's see if we can like break that out. So 4 or 5 other writers will get sent off to a room to try and break it out as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then we'll go back and pitch it back to those 2 guys again, and if they get their notes, obviously, and if it feels like it's coming together as something that like can be an episode, then one person, typically the person who pitched it, but not always, will be sent off to write the episode. Will basically be sent out of the office for a couple of weeks to go sit in some terrible Starbucks or something and write the first draft. And then we'll come back with that draft, and everybody, of course, will say, "Oh my God, this is so great! Oh, we can't touch a word, blah blah blah." And then we'll proceed to just sort of rip it to shreds and rewrite it all together. And that rewrite process happens again and again over the course of the production of the episode, like as it's being drawn up and produced. There will be multiple chances to sort of rewrite it, but whoever was that first person who went to that Starbucks to write it for a couple of weeks, that's the person who's listed as the the written by Joe Schmo. Like that's who gets that written by credit. That's sort of like in very rough thumbnail the writing process for Family Guy.
There's a lot of moving parts, isn't there?
Yeah, sure. But, we've been doing it for quite a while now, so it kind of has sort of its own rhythm. It's a long rhythm. If episodes that, that we start breaking right now probably will not get on the air for, a year and a half or so. So you have to be, sort of careful about timely stuff, topical stuff. If you like see something in the news, you're like, oh, this would be a hilarious like Family Guy episode. You have to go, oh, well, people aren't going to really remember that a year and a half from now, will they? And in most cases, the answer is no, they won't. See, it needs to be, more sort of relationship stuff, or more, timeless stuff, or whatever is what you will try and like build your episodes around.
Well, speaking of the longevity that this show has, Family Guy has been on the air longer than most people listening to this podcast have probably even been alive.
Yes.
With so many episodes under your belt, what's the biggest challenge to you in maintaining fresh as well as original humor in a show like this?
Oh, gosh, it's a really good question. Definitely, trying to avoid what we've done before is hard. Like obviously I don't write for The Simpsons. So The Simpsons has been around even longer than us. And at this point, this sort of like urban legend about The Simpsons writing staff is like, one of the writers will pitch something and somebody will go, oh, we've already did it. And the writer will go, yeah, but have we done it twice? And so, maybe Family Guy has been around long enough that we can we start to give ourselves sort of this kind of second chance at some of that. But I don't know, like a lot of the jokes that we're writing are sort of like responses to kind of like social mores, right? And those social mores like change and evolve over time. We've been fortunate enough to sort of like see society change in lots of ways. And so, so the joke that you wrote 20 years ago, like that was a response to whatever was kind of in the air societally back then, like is different from the joke that you're going to write now because you're sort of responding to a different society. So I guess, social change maybe is kind of the best secret weapon for trying to, write jokes that are fresh and new.
There's a lot of buzz right now about some of Family Guy's crazier moments. And given your role as a writer on the show, what do you consider to be one of the wildest, most out there scenes or episodes you've worked on?
That's tough. So I was thinking the other day about, so there's really three ways that a joke or a scene, that anything can get rejected by the censors. And one is standards, right? It was broadcast standards. Fox network saying we don't want to have that on our show, or even the FCC, because it's a broadcast show. The FCC would pull our license if we have that kind of content on, right? So there's standards, there's legal. You could get sued or the network could get sued if we say that, so you're not allowed to say that. And then there is advertising, right? That's making fun of a product that advertises with this network, and we don't want to, or gives free advertising to it, whatever. So those are sort of the three things that will get like a joke rejected. And I remember the one thing that I can recall that sort of like hit the trifecta of like, we couldn't do it for all three reasons was Peter was taking the Pepsi challenge, and it's this definitely like goes way back, probably before some of the younger listeners would recall. But back in the 80s, there was an ad campaign called the Pepsi Challenge, where people would drink Pepsi and Coke, like out there, sort of like in the wild, would drink a little bit of Pepsi and a little bit of Coke and see if they could like decide like which one they liked the most. And then, Pepsi would only sort of reveal, oh, that was Pepsi that you liked the most. What do you think about that? You said you like Coke best, but you just chose Pepsi, whatever. So it's Peter taking the Pepsi challenge, but it was, can he tell the difference between Pepsi and hobo diarrhea? And so it involves him sort of taking a cup and taking one sip, think about it, and taking another sip, think about it, and taking a third sip, and going, yeah, that's the hobo diarrhea. And Fox said, yep, that's the trifecta. You can't show Peter willfully drinking diarrhea. We can't, we don't want to get sued by Pepsi, and we don't want to offend Pepsi as an advertiser. So I don't know. That may not be a good answer to your question, but that's the answer you're going to get.
I have another interesting question. This one comes from a friend of the show, Corey Michaels, and he asks, given the increasing role of AI in various industries, including animation, what are your thoughts on the potential impact of AI on the animation industry overall?
It's a good question. I don't know. Maybe Skynet will have all of our comedy writing jobs sometime soon. I've been at Family Guy now, starting in April of 2004. So, if AI takes my job tomorrow, I'll just go, well, I've had a good run. But so far, it's not. It hasn't gotten there, right? It's you can go to ChatGPT and say, write me, a Stewie Griffin joke, and they're not awesome jokes yet, but someday maybe it'll get there, and if it does, I'll just tip my cap and say, all right, diarrhea jokes are yours now, computer world. Write some good ones, and I'm looking forward to enjoying them.
Have there ever been any episodes of Family Guy where a joke or an idea had gotten shut down for being too wild?
Yeah, I mean, every day, every episode, there's a list of 8 or 9 jokes that that this broadcast standards says, for the reasons that one of the 3 reasons I just described, this says you can't do that. And then we will go back to it, and it'll be like, no, you misunderstand the joke. Like, it doesn't mean this, which would obviously be horrible, and we can't do that on the air. It really, what it means is this. So that's better, right? So, and then sometimes they'll like buy it, like, okay, yeah, we don't really, we're not genuinely fooled by that argument, but we will, say that you've given us some plausible deniability on it, so we'll let you have it. And sometimes there's a negotiation, like, okay, you give us 3 of these jokes and we'll let you have this one joke, right? So then sometimes you'll put a joke in just basically just kind of to be cannon fodder and to hope, that like, this one's going to take a hit, but these other jokes will sort of get through. And sometimes it really is just sort of frame by frame. So this actually precedes my arrival on the writing staff, but there was a very early uh, uh, parody of like a diamond commercial, um, where like you see like these sort of silhouettes as this kind of like classical music plays, and it was a parody of like a line of jewelry commercials from back in like the 90s or whatever. You see the silhouette of this man and this woman together, and the man gives the male silhouette gives the woman's silhouette like a diamond ring, and the woman's silhouette then begins to sort of lower out of frame, the presumption being to fillet the man, and then it goes to like a title card that says diamonds. She'll pretty much have to, and Standards didn't like that joke, and apparently Standards was willing to sort of discuss it, and it ended up being on the air, but like a representative of Standards came into the edit bay, and like they literally argued over how many frames, the woman's silhouette would sort of begin to lower before it could cut off. Like, is 6 frames of that action not enough? Can we have 7 frames and stuff like that? So like it can get kind of like very specific, and this obviously like is tipping. I don't know, maybe it's not that big of a deal, but there's a episode that's coming where the Griffins meet Tom Brady, who we have done an episode in the past with Tom Brady and stuff. But in this episode, Meg is Meg has sort of befriended Tom Brady, and Peter thinks that that perhaps there's a romance brewing there. And Peter says something to the effect of, Meg, if Tom Brady, tries to do like some hand stuff on you or whatever, like see if you can grab his Super Bowl ring. The implication being, with your vagina to grab Tom Brady's Super Bowl ring from his fingers. And then Lois is appalled at that, and Peter, says, "Oh, Lois used to be like the Little Shop of Horrors plant all the time, whatever." All very sort of crass, right? And then later on in the episode, Peter's talking to Tom Brady in some public location, and then suddenly Tom Brady's like, "Hey," and like Lois starts sort of shimmying to the exit, like, "Peter, I got the ring, let's go." And the Fox stands like, "You can't do that." And our argument is like, "Oh no, she doesn't have the ring in her genitals. They're between her butt cheeks, so so that's acceptable." And we'll see if we succeed with that argument or not. But yeah, no, this is a daily process.
Well, let's talk about your relationship with Seth MacFarlane. You and Seth are frequently credited together. Can you talk to me more about your partnership with him? Like, how did your collaboration begin?
I mean, I have no partnership with Seth MacFarlane is a billionaire genius. He employs me sometimes, which is great, and it's and I'm grateful. But like in no way am I any sort of partner to Seth MacFarlane. I'm just fortunate that he hires me sometimes. But the first time I met him actually preceded my time at Family Guy, and it was, you may know, Family Guy was on the air for 3 years, and then it got canceled. And then it came back starting for season 4, and we've now been at it for quite a while now. And so when it came back is when I was hired. But in that interim, when it was canceled, Seth MacFarlane still had a deal with Fox, and he was on what's called an overall deal, which is like, his contract with Fox wasn't just specific to Family Guy. They, had hired him to create new shows. So he still had this, and he was working on this live action pilot called Simon that didn't end up going. And meanwhile, I had been working on this show in the late 90s and early 2000s called Titus, which was on Fox, and it also was off the air now. And my bosses at Titus, these guys named Jack Kenny and Brian Hargrove, also had the same sort of overall deal. So Fox basically just sort of grabbed Seth MacFarlane and grabbed my bosses, Jack and Brian, and crammed them together and said, there, go work on that Simon show together, right? We're paying you, so go to this office and, look busy. And I had been a writer on Titus for a couple of years, but they needed a writer's assistant. That's somebody who is not a writer, but is in the room and just sort of typing up everything, transcribing and whatever, proofreading, the stuff that the writers are doing. So my then, at that point, former bosses were like, hey, we need a writer's assistant. Would you like to come, basically take a demotion and go do this? And I said, yeah, I needed a job. I was not too proud to take a step back. So I went there, and that lasted for 3 or 4 months. But I think Seth MacFarlane must have thought, oh, this guy is, he's nice or funny or whatever. So when that show didn't go anywhere, but Family Guy did get picked back up, that sort of helped me to get that job there at Family Guy. And yeah, so I've been lucky, to help out a little with Ted and with Ted 2. And then with the first season of the Ted series, though I'm not working on the second season, and just pitching jokes on things like, Million Ways to Die in the West and the Oscars and stuff like that. So it's been great. I wish everybody in the world could have a Seth MacFarlane in their life who keeps giving you jobs. The world would be a much better place if we all had our own personal Seth MacFarlane. But
Well, as a fellow screenwriter myself, I have a similar sense of humor as you, and even I have a sitcom of my own, just collecting dust, that I've been told feels like it could have been written by a Family Guy writer, which makes me curious to know what advice you would give to any other writers out there trying to get out there with their craft.
Well, so yeah, what I say to people in these sorts of things is trying to make it in this business, right, is like trying to win the lottery. And so for one thing, I always then kind of feel guilty when people are like, oh, how did you get your job? The implication being, how can I get a job like the one that you have, Patrick? Which I don't, in any way bemoan anyone asking, you try and get all the information you can, right? But for me answering it, because I've been so fortunate, I feel it's akin to asking me hey, you won the lottery. How do you win the lottery? And my answer is oh my God, it's very easy. You just go, you buy a lottery ticket. You only need one. And then you go and you turn on the news that night and they read the numbers, and the numbers they read are the same that's on your ticket. You win. It's so easy. It's great. So that's how it worked for me. Why don't you do it? And it's, it's, you have to get super lucky, right? So, but even within sort of that kind of set of parameters, right? How do you increase your chances of winning the lottery, right? Well, you get as many tickets as you can. And, and most of them are going to be duds. Let's be honest, probably all of them will be duds, but the more you have, the greater chance you have of one of them being something that hits. And what it is that sort of hits from, time to time can change. It used to be that if somebody lived in West Virginia, and this was before my time, right? This is in the 80s. Somebody lived in West Virginia and they're like, oh, I love this show. I'm going to write a script of it and I'm going to send it there, right? And then, you get a call from president of Hollywood who's like, I got your script, kid, and it's hilarious. Pack your bags and go into Hollywood. And like, that's gone. That doesn't happen anymore, right? But if you do live in LA, which doesn't hurt, like getting a job in as an assistant on a show is like a great way to sort of network and kind of like pay some dues while you are doing, while you're doing things like writing, your episodes, right? So that helps. That's like, okay, I've got this lottery ticket and it's called I'm an assistant and I'm networking, right? If you don't live in Hollywood, like to me, one of the best tickets you can buy for yourself now is really honestly to sort of make your own stuff, is to create things which just write with your own cell phone and stuff that is just sort of like short and punchy and you can just sort of put it online and like keep following it up, basically creating content that like will, you hope, like catch somebody's eye. And in the sort of like dream best case scenario, which is, not super frequent, but it does happen, somebody notices it here in this town and like wants to adapt it, wants to make that thing for real, right? Less more frequent, but still amazing is somebody sees it and wants to meet with you and is like, I love this so much. It's not right for insert studio or production company or whatever that like I'm with. We can't really do this, but what else do you have, right? And like that's amazing too. And meanwhile, the stuff that you have made, if you have made it with friends, that's also purchasing a lottery ticket, because a lot of several of those friends, you don't know, may end up like going on to do other stuff, like even after your guys' collaboration may go on to do something else that does hit. And then now you have like more opportunities that open up. So like, working with others sort of becomes like a force multiplier in that way. So I have friends, including myself, like, know people who got the job because they were an assistant and sort of worked their way up. Meanwhile, they were kind of writing their own stuff, right? I have worked with people who have sort of created like web comics, and like Seth MacFarlane happens to notice it, and is like, oh, I want to meet with these people and like maybe like hire them. Or so I've worked with those folks. I've worked with stand-ups who did stand-up and then sort of befriended people who ended up creating stuff of their own. And then when it comes time that they need to sort of like produce this thing, they like want to surround themselves with as many sort of funny, talented people as they can, and they turn to like the friends that they that they saw do stand up, right? So I think working on some of your own stuff, especially stuff that you can just kind of like get out there, is really sort of the best path right now.
Being a producer and writer on the shows you've been credited for tends to put you in more of a spotlight, but outside of the incredible work that you do, there's also an amazing team behind the scenes that I feel often goes unnoticed, if you will. And I think it's really important for us to take the time to showcase gratitude and appreciation for the people who make all of this happen. And while I understand you can't shout out everybody, could you please take a moment to recognize some of the talented writers or animators or other team members who have made significant contributions to the show's overall success?
If I started naming names of like artists and animators at Family Guy, like I'd have to go on, and I would invariably like forget some names and like and then just be just a much bigger asshole than if I didn't name a single name to begin with. So I think I'm going to take that second door and not name any names. But I will say that the artists and animators who make Family Guy happen, like they blow me away every day. There's an episode that we just saw where or an episode that's in process, the screening of which I just saw, where Brian and Stewie go to China. And and I wrote an episode. I wrote a joke just kind of as a lark, like they're just sort of Brian and Stu are just kind of walking around in Beijing, and Stu's like, "Hey, Brian, watch this. This will be hilarious." And he just yells out, "Everybody, the Olympics are coming!" And like all of a sudden, within like a second and a half, like a giant mob of Chinese workers like builds a whole stadium, and Stewie's like, "Right? Isn't that amazing? Of course, like 800 people just died, but still, freaking China, man. You know, tip your cap." And it's like the action, or excuse me, the words, right? Like, you know, a giant mob of workers suddenly builds a stadium. That's like maybe 3 lines on a piece of paper, right? But then it has to be drawn step by step. And it probably like if you were to like sort of look at the stack of storyboards that it takes to execute that, it's probably like this thick of just page after page after page after page after page. And it's like every single one of those human beings who did that drawing had to hate my fucking guts for you know, for just sort of like flippantly just kind of like, you know, doing that. But they did it, and they did it, and it looks amazing, and like it just blows me away all the time. Actually, like I will be in a like in a gag room with like the other writers, and like I'll pitch something, and like one of the other writers might go, "Yeah, but how's that gonna work? Like how did the animators sort of like, you know, like what do they depict there?" And I'm like, "That's fucking their problem. Like I just want to get this joke into the script and go home to my wife and children. Like let the animators worry about how to make that happen." And that's their job, is to worry about like how to like sort of like depict like really undepictable things. And they do it, just every single episode. And so yeah, no, I can't do what they do. I just cannot.
As we come to a close, this podcast is really big on gratitude and loving yourself. And every day when I wake up and before I go to bed, I say 3 things I'm grateful for. So now I'd like to ask you, Patrick, what are the 3 things that you are grateful for?
Oh my God. Whew. Well, I mean, where do I start? When I go to the sink and I turn the water on, like water comes out, right? And it's fresh, clean water, and it's like, um, and I don't have to worry that I'm gonna get cholera or something from it. And like that seems like it's obviously it's something that we all just sort of like take for granted. But if you go back like maybe like 200 years, you know, like kings and queens didn't have that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and start with water that comes out of my tap and allows me to clean my dishes and my ass and hydrate myself, right? I am grateful for I'm grateful for instant communication. I'm grateful for being able to talk to you and to talk to anybody around the world instantly whenever I want to. That's another thing that if you go back, you know, 150 years, like nobody would have conceived of that. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say this. I'm grateful for my Amazon Echo. It's right there. You see it, right? Any piece of music I ever want to hear on the planet, like you say it and like it'll just kind of play it, right? And I was reading a book. I wish I could remember the title, but it was a book about sort of essentially it was about human discontent. And like this guy, it leads off with like a quote from some sort of like futurist in like 1900. And the futurist was saying that in the future, every human being will have a box, like a small box in his or her home, and that box will be able to play any music that has ever existed. And you'll be able to speak to the box, you'll be able to request the music you want, and it will just play the music. And when history hits that point, everyone will be so happy that there will be no more war or greed or hunger or sort of unfulfilled desires. At that point, it's just smooth sailing from there on out. So he got the first half right. There it is, right there, you know, futurist from 1800.
he missed a little bit on the second half. But you know what? I'm still pretty grateful. If I want to hear Pat Benatar, I'll just say, Alexa, play Pat Benatar. And he's shuffling songs by Pat Benatar. So there you go.
There you go.
I'm grateful. And you know what? I'm sneaking in number 4. I'm grateful for Pat Benatar. Pat, if you're listening, you're doing great.
Shout out, Pat Benatar. Where can people find you online?
You can't. I have deleted. There's another thing I'm grateful for. Deleted all my social media handles, and I'm very grateful for that.
That's smart,
I'll never go back.
Thank you again for granting me your time to do this with me here today.
Hey, absolutely, David. Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, please like and subscribe to the channel. Follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and rate us 5 stars. I'm David Clair-Bennett, and he is Patrick Meighan, and we are out.